Welcome to Do You Ever Wonder? The show that brings you answers to many of the questions that you may have, but with no one to ask. Do You Ever Wonder is hosted by Mike Haltman, CEO of Hallmark Abstract Service, who, like you, has always been deeply curious about a wide variety of topics. Each week, Mike will be speaking with guests who are leaders in their field and who have inspirational stories to tell. So now, sit back and enjoy the show.
Hi, everyone. This is Mike Haltman, and you have tuned in to Do You Ever Wonder? So, let me ask a question. What do the states of Florida, Nevada, Texas, Washington, New Hampshire, Wyoming, Alaska, Tennessee, and South Dakota, what do they all have in common? And what they all have in common is that they have no state income tax. So, what does that mean for people in New York? That means that more likely than not, at some point in time, they've considered moving to one of those states because the tax burden in New York is quite oppressive and probably will only get more so. And that's why today's guest is so important, because she's going to walk us through what it takes to move to those states and actually be able to claim those states as residency. So I know, a lot of people consider, and I know people I talk to, 6 months in a day and you're good to go. And you save all your credit card receipts, you pump gas, you do whatever. But in reality, that's not really going to cut it. And you need to know what the real rules are. So, just as a quick statistic, I think since 2020, 800 or so thousand people have left New York. So, let's talk to our guest. Our guest is Marissa Friedrich, and she is special counsel at the firm Chaves, Perlowitz, and Luftig. I got that right?
You got that right.
Because sometimes I mispronounce that first word, and I try not to. So, welcome, Marissa.
Thank you so much, Mike. I appreciate the welcome.
Absolutely. So, this is a critically important topic, correct?
It very much is. And sadly, as you mentioned, many people do not really understand fully the rules that are in place for you to be able to move out of New York to one of these lower or no tax states for tax purposes. New York State is extremely aggressive in pursuing people who are trying to do so. As you can imagine, the state is looking for revenue, wants to hold on to those tax revenues, and they don't want to let them go so freely.
100%. So, what happens to some people is they move, they do what they think is right, and then they end up getting bitten in the ass.
Pretty much.
So to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. You pretty much summed it up, because
Right.
you get this audit down the line, and it's quite an ordeal. It's very stressful, it's costly, and the results may not be always in your favor.
I can only imagine. And so before we get to some of the specifics and then the down and dirty criteria really of what it takes to do it and do it the right way, what brought you to the area of tax controversy?
Well, I've always been interested in tax as far back as undergraduate. I took every accounting and tax course I possibly could take. And then when I continued on to law school, I again wanted to continue on taking any tax course or the related subject that I could. And I have great professors who really made it very interesting and exciting. Everyone hears tax and they're like, why would you want to do tax? It sounds so boring. But in actuality, it's very exciting. It's a lot of investigative work and putting pieces of puzzles together. So I find that very exciting, very interesting. Every day is different. It's not the same. And then I started working at a boutique law firm out on Long Island in New York. Where all we did was specialize or concentrate in tax controversy work. So we help resolve tax issues relating to the IRS or New York State. And I happen to concentrate on assisting people with either planning or any resulting audits from moving in or moving out of New York State.
That's phenomenal. And where'd you go to school?
I went to Hofstra undergraduate, Hofstra University, and Hofstra Law. So I'm a Hofstra squared.
You know what? I'm Albany squared, so it's good
nice.
You know what? You find a school you like and a good school, so it's great to stay. Good stuff.
Absolutely. Yes.
So now, what brought you to Chaves Perlowitz Luftig?
Sadly, the owner of Tenenbaum Law, Karen Tenenbaum, for whom I worked 20 years, passed away very suddenly, very abruptly, the end of this past year. And it was time for me to move on. And I decided to join, we'll call them CPL, Sheaves Perlowitz Luftig, CPL. And I started the tax controversy group there. And so it's a very exciting new opportunity, and I'm ready to go.
That's fantastic. So, are you the sole member of the tax controversy group?
At this time, yes.
Okay. And it is something like I'd never really heard the phrase tax controversy. You know, when I hear about a tax controversy, I hear of an individual getting an audit letter from the government, and it usually pertains to the income tax, but I guess yours does too, in a different way. But how many experts? Because you're very passionate about what you do. I'm sure you're incredibly good at what you do. Is it a field rife with experts?
Well, as an attorney, I can't call myself an expert. That's
Okay.
not ethically correct. So, but yeah, there aren't many people that do have a concentration in this area. There are people that are familiar with rules and understanding of it and can absolutely handle the matters very well. It's just this is all I do and all I've done for 20 years, so that I have developed certain skills, negotiating skills, and understanding of the law that perhaps others within the tax law world do not quite understand fully. So that's what differentiates myself from, say, a tax attorney,
Right.
or even a tax controversy attorney. It encompasses so many different areas. I really just specify my work on IRS and New York State matters only.
So is part of what you bring to the table, I know in a lot of different areas of the law, part of it is the contacts you have, the relationships that you've built. Is that anything in tax controversy? Are there people in New York State who, over the years, you've worked with, you have become, where they know you as being competent and trustworthy and can take you at some level of your word?
Yeah, and that's very, very important in our area is developing those relationships such that, representatives at New York State know that you have work in good faith and that they can rely on you and that you're punctual and that you're responsive. So though doing that over and over again for so many years, I have developed those deep relationships with people in Albany, as well as the local offices. There are really great auditors that really want to resolve these matters at the local levels, and having those good relationships, obviously treating everyone with respect, and that goes without saying, does go far. But
Absolutely.
yeah, so definitely have those relationships and continue to foster them.
So do the auditors at the local level, do they have the power of authority to make a decision and say your client is good or your client is not good, or does it kind of go up the line a little bit to somebody else who has to make the decision?
So yes and no. So they're the auditor, the audit team is usually a three-person team. The auditor with whom you do most of your communicating with and negotiating and document back and forth is the lower level auditor of the team. And they are the ones that once they've reviewed everything and gone through all the documentation and data that you've produced to them, they're the ones that make the initial determination. So they're the ones that will say to the higher ups, the supervisor, the section head, you know what, I've reviewed everything. I'm making the determination that this is a case that either should be closed with no change, or we find that there's some issue, whatever that issue may be. And then it's ultimately the higher up, the two higher ups within the team that make the ultimate decision.
And do they, so you're the lower level person makes a recommendation. Do they, based on who you are and based on who they are, the upper people typically will accept that? Because I'm sure they don't want to go through all the data, right?
No, generally speaking, they will accept that which the lower the audit level auditor will recommend. However, if there's something where I have issue, perhaps with what that determination or recommendation is, then we can reach out and have a group discussion, and those higher ups will entertain any additional information or listen to your viewpoint, and that may change their minds in some way. In some cases, that has happened.
So typically, ego tends to get in the way, or I mean, these are powerful people whose decisions can make a big dent in somebody's financials. So that's good to know that they are kind of willing to listen and willing to accept changes, because I know in a lot of areas of government, it's not that easy.
It certainly isn't easy, but if you do have the documentation and the proof, and you can make a put together argument for why that should be accepted, or perhaps why the auditor didn't see it exactly your way, they will
Right.
consider it. And you have to remember, these auditors are very, very overworked. I think the number of auditors at New York State have gone down, while the number of audits have increased. So they're very overworked. A lot of these cases are old and aging, and they want them off their desks. So in some cases, you may get lucky in that you have an older case that they want to get rid of, and they will come to some type of settlement in order to do so.
So why are they needing of auditors? Are they losing them to the feds?
They are losing them to the IRS. As you know, the IRS have hired a lot of
Right.
new auditors and agents, and a lot of them have come from New York State. It's just the IRS pays more. It just comes down to dollars.
Right. Substantially more?
I believe so.
Really?
Enough to see them go. I'm working some cases now in which the auditors have left, auditors with whom I've worked on these matters since the inception, and now we have to start all over again with a new auditor.
Right. That's interesting. You would
Yeah.
think, with all the money New York wastes, that the income generating areas would be an area where maybe they would do whatever it takes to keep people.
You would think. No, not quite.
You would think. Sometimes I wonder if government actually does think, but that's a whole nother discussion
Exactly.
that's not for here. So
Right.
I know that New York State is unbelievably aggressive, as you said, in Florida. And I think they have offices down in Florida.
They do.
Now,
Several.
are they equally as aggressive in the other states that don't have an income tax? Do they have offices in all of those states?
I'm not certain about the other states, but they are very much aggressive, really, regardless of where you go. Especially if you're a high net worth individual, if you're a
Right.
good taxpayer, you've been consistently a
Right.
very good customer of the state, regardless of where you go, because they have no inkling of where you've gone. They just see either a
Uh,
missing tax return, or you've changed your filing status from resident to non-resident, and that makes all the bells and whistles go off. So they really have no idea of where you've gone. So that's really what the determining factor is. Have
right.
you been a good customer? And they don't want to lose you.
So do they actually have bells and whistles that go off? Or is
They have
that more,
they have a very sophisticated system.
they
It's
do,
called the
they,
KISS system, CISS, and all the departments within the state really talk to each other. So any the Department of State that gets a new business, that gets reported somehow to DTF,
that's,
Department of Taxation and Finance. Then if you have purchases of home, that department notifies DTF, hey, there's a person who's purchasing in the state, you may want to look into them. And certainly within that department, seeing the changing in filing status from one year to the next will prompt some type of look into the person's history to see, is this worthwhile? Is this worth our resources to look
right.
into further, send a residency inquiry, and further investigate this taxpayer?
That's good that they interact with each department, interstate agency wise, because I know federally, many times the agencies don't talk to each other. It's a
Even
huge
within the
thing.
IRS, they don't talk to each other.
Right.
Different
Everyone's
departments within the IRS do not share information, which makes it very frustrating.
everyone's protecting whatever they think their territory is. But I
Correct?
know, so I often say that people are leaving New York in droves, as the statistics show, And most of those people, or a lot of those people, are high income people. And as they leave and as the tax base shrinks, the rest of us are going to be left holding the bag. And I'm curious, are there statistics in terms of how many 1% level income people leave? Like of the 800,000, are most of those higher level taxpayers, or it's impossible to know?
I think it's impossible to know right now. Perhaps sometime in the future we'll get some more definitive numbers on that. But as
Right.
far as I know, I don't know of any statistics showing exactly how many. I do know that many wealthy people are not only just leaving the state, but they're retaining that which they have here and purchasing in another state, such as Florida, and keeping residence in both because they have the means to do so.
Right.
And again, that prompts another inquiry as to, I'm sure we'll discuss this later on. Have they changed their domicile to Florida if they're retaining something here? And even if they've retained something here, now you're subject to yet another test, which could tax you on your worldwide income.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, no, it's interesting. It's a never-ending web of taxes.
True.
So you, as an expert, should be someone that people consult with. How critical is having a good CPA? Or is that nothing?
It's extremely critical, not only for the CPA or even a financial advisor to understand the implications of at least starting to think or contemplate a move out of the state, to recognize the potential issues, to understand if there's a recognition event coming up, and that you want to make sure that that change is done well before the recognition event so that you're not trapped into some type of battle with the state as to when is the change of domicile date, such that, of course, the state wants to include that recognition event before the move. So you want to really have a really good CPA that at least is familiar with the rules. They shouldn't have to be experts, quote unquote, experts on the rules, but at least be able to identify the situation which could cause a potential issue.
Right.
If they know the rules and they understand their clients are doing everything correctly, you don't need any further guidance. But if there are any businesses involved, keeping a homestead here in New York, any other issue that may cause some pause in whether or not there was a clear change of domicile, you either have to have a CPA that's even more knowledgeable or bring in a tax attorney who works in this field that can help out.
Right. It's interesting because it seems like, you talk to people and that a lot of people look at this as like a no-brainer and it's just a
Right.
seat of the pants. But I mean, I don't even know, we haven't talked about what the penalties and interest and all of that are, but I'm sure it's egregious if
It is.
if, right.
It is.
Because, I mean, I'm sure on some level you've tried to screw New York State, so now they're going to screw you.
Is
Sort of,
that,
so
well,
to speak,
right.
so to speak.
So to speak, right.
Right.
So again, like you said, it's, you hear from your buddy, moved to Florida. He moved 7 years ago. He has no issues. He wasn't audited. So I'm going to do the same thing because, it's not going to happen to me. And then bam,
Right. Yeah, yeah.
you get that
And,
audit
and
letter.
and those letters, you know what? When you get those letters, sometimes there's a check inside, but usually not.
Right.
Usually something else is going on.
Right.
So you mentioned before statutory
Residency.
residency versus domicile.
Right.
Okay. What is, just in general terms, what's the difference between statutory residency and domicile?
Okay, so domicile is if you're living in a state, regardless of the state, but that's your true home. That's where your stuff is. That's where your home is. That's where you come and go from on a daily basis. That's where you work. That's where your family lives. All those things encompass your domicile, and you can only have one. So wherever that state is, wherever that place is, that's the one true domicile. Statutory residency is, as it states, statute. It's by statute. You are being deemed a resident of a state. And this really goes to New York. Other states have similar rules and statutes, but I'm speaking just with respect to New York State. So this means with statutory resident is that you're not a domiciliary of New York. You're actually a non-resident. You live in another state. However, because of your presence of having an abode in the state and spending a certain number of days in the state, you are then pulled into the world of taxation in New York.
So one way or another, they're going to get you. Kind of.
Yeah, it depends. Perhaps.
Well, that's why they need somebody like you. But are these rules static or are they changing all the time? Is it dynamic where you have to stay on top of changes all of the time?
No, not essentially. I mean, there is case law that comes out that changes the way in which they are applied. The rules haven't really changed much. The statutory residency rule, they changed what substantially all the year means from 11 months to 10 months. So minor tweaks here and there. However, they basically stayed the same from their inception. It's the way in which they are applied, or the way in which they are interpreted by courts in some cases. There was an OBIS case recently, and it was about a statutory residency case in which someone from New Jersey who worked in New York City had a small little cabin upstate New York and only used it three weeks per year. He took his stuff there, took it home. His wife hated going there. It was a 4 or 5 hour trip. He had to notify the neighbor because it's shooting country. Hey, I'm coming. No, don't shoot me. So all those factors taken into consideration, the court actually determined that it really wasn't something that was a residential interest in a property that would satisfy the first part of the statutory residency rule. And so he was not considered a statutory resident. So again, was it because the cabin was so far away from his home? Was it because he only spent 3 weeks there? The court didn't give us any guidance. So really, you have to take it all in totality, that you really have to meet all that criteria in order to have the OBIS case apply to you. I actually had that situation soon after the decision came out, and I was able to apply it to my client's case, and we won the case for him based on OBIS. So it does happen, but you really don't know with those situations. You really have to get the facts and circumstances as close as possible. But for the rules, they're basically the same.
Interesting. So he would have been taxed on some level as a New York State resident in terms of some portion of his income? Because obviously
his whole income. His entire worldwide income, because he was a New Jersey resident. He had a permanent place of abode in the state of New York for substantially all the year, which is more than 11 months, I believe. No, 10 months at the time, I think. Or was it 11? 11 or 10 months. He had it meeting the first part of the test. And then the second part was, did he come to New York for more than 183 days? Well, he worked in New York City. So he was coming to the state more than 183 days. So initially he was subject to this. Subject on taxation on his worldwide income in New York. And then he fought it and he actually won. And that, the limited residential interest he had in this property was viewed as not being satisfactory for the first part of the test. Again, we don't know exactly which factor it was exactly. So we take it as a totality of all those factors taken together, won him his case.
So had he lost the case, they could have gone back whatever number of years he owned the cabin and retroactively taxed him. So
yes, if that were part of the audit, yes.
So whatever it cost him, because people always say, I'm going to sue you, I'm going to take you to court, but the expenses are huge.
Yes.
But in his case, it was definitely money well spent.
I'm sure it was. And
that ruling would be ad infinitum. It would go forward. He's done. He's done unless New York State Department of Taxation and Finance in some way gets the statute changed or the rules changed, where they say even in those circumstances you would still be subject to the statutory residency rules. But what if he then started going there 190 days a year? They would have to go back, reopen the case, and then they
usually don't. They usually don't do that.
Right. I was going to say, especially if they're shorthanded, that would be a lot of work.
Right. I think they washed their hands of that one and now are adjusting accordingly. And again, if they're seeing a lot of those types of OBIS cases, they may alter the statute or the law or the regulations in some way to compensate for that. But again, because the court didn't really give guidance onto what was the one glaring factor that came to be in his case, you would really have to fit all those parameters that he had. You know, he was far away. He didn't live in a state. He kept his stuff out of the house. He gave lots of notice before he came. I just happened to have the same exact case. So I was very lucky. My client was very fortunate, and he ended up being successful.
Precedent. You had precedent.
I had precedent, correct.
That's fantastic. So last thing before we get to the criteria that would demonstrate that somebody is in fact domiciled in Florida or one of the other states, you spoke about an audit. So now they do an audit. So now when they're done with the audit, you're done, or they can come back and do a re-audit.
So you've changed your domicile. You got audited. The state puts the burden on the person claiming the change of domicile. So that's normally it's you. It's the taxpayer that's moving out of New York to another state. He has the burden to show by clear and convincing evidence all these factors that we will later discuss. Now, let's say he's successful on the audit. He's won. There's a determination, an agreement on a change of domicile date. And from that point forward, that taxpayer is now a domiciliary of, and we'll use Florida because it's easier, of Florida. He's now a Floridian as of whatever that date was. Now, he will not be re-audited on those same years. But if he does come back to New York, or he takes enough steps to ensure that he is acting as if he's now a domiciliary of New York State, New York State has the burden now to show that he changed his domicile back. Again, the burden of proof is on the party claiming the change of domicile. So the state will now have to show that he moved back to New York.
What would be the tip-off for New York? Assuming that they don't have the wherewithal to audit everybody all the time, what would be the tip-off to New York that, hey, we should look at this guy again?
So say the taxpayer retained a home here in New York. And after the change of domicile, they start spending more time in New York.
Which is shown how?
It's shown either through they have a business here, they have, normally if they retain a residence here, even if you get the change of domicile, the state will continue to audit you on a statutory residency basis if they felt during the review of the change of domicile that you had high number of days spent in New York.
Okay.
So if the dollars again are there and it's worth their resources, they may continue an audit maybe a year or two after to ensure that you don't have a statutory residency issue.
Right.
Okay.
But
and again, sorry?
The burden shifts from the taxpayer, right. Now it's on the state.
So I always advise clients, don't give them the ammunition to be able to establish that. So if you're clearly just coming here, it's a fluke year, or you just have more business ties, or just a lot of family events for which you have to come, or maybe you have a child attending school and you're coming back to check on them, whatever the reason may be, don't give them the ammunition. So make sure that you're not moving your stuff back here, that you're spending important events still in Florida or wherever you ended up. Right. Just again, to be consistent with that, Florida is still your domicile and you're not reestablishing yourself in New York.
Right.
Now,
so
that doesn't preclude you from the stat res rules. You may still be subject to those. And the other thing I should say is if you're spending more time here, what ends up happening, people are familiar with the statutory residency rules and they start filing as a resident, not marking their return as being filed solely for stat res purposes, not as a domiciliary. So when the state starts seeing a resident tax return being filed in New York over time, they start wondering, and then you have a year in which they don't file because perhaps the date count isn't there. They start questioning, did they come back right. Now? They have all these years in which they're spending so much time here, perhaps they've returned.
Right. It's fascinating. So now, what are the criteria that people have to focus on in terms of proving to New York State that they are indeed domiciled somewhere else?
So I always tell people it's not like you said 6 months and a day and that you got your driver's license in Florida. That is not the criteria. There are 5 factors. So you have an intent of wanting to move somewhere. I always say, take that intent and use it in these 5 factors and keep lots and lots of documentation to show that you're meeting your burden. It's a high burden. It's by clear and convincing evidence. So those 5 factors are home, business involvement, time spent, items near and dear, and family connections.
Okay, so of those criteria, I would think time spent would be the most critical.
Well, the non-resident audit guidelines tell auditors they have to look at each one individually and then everything in totality. Essentially a T-chart where you're on one side, the state's on the other, and you have the factors down the side and a check mark to see who wins, and then whoever has the most check marks wins. So that's essentially generally how it's supposed to work. It doesn't always work that way.
Right.
Like you said, they're very, very much harp on the time factor.
Sure.
They want to make sure that you're spending not 183 days, not 6 months in a day, but a significant amount of time in the new domicile. And the comparison is between New York and the new domicile, and it's not anywhere else. So if you happen to have another residence, or you want to take, say, a 3-month trip before you land in Florida, those days don't count in the comparison. So you essentially can be spending more time in New York than your new purported domicile, because you've spent so much time in other places that you've diluted the amount of time spent in Florida, such that it looks like you're spending more time in in New York than Florida. So you have to be very, very careful. The comparison is New York and Florida days, not anywhere else.
So if I spend 200 days in Florida and 120 days in Alabama, I lose those 120 days as a Florida resident, as part of my domicile.
Right, but then you have very few in New York,
Right.
I think, in that example,
Correct.
compared to Florida. So you should be okay.
Okay.
There's an unwritten rule that for every day in New York, you should have at a minimum, bare minimum, 2 days in the new domicile.
Okay.
And part
So
of that is, spending your important holidays and celebrations in the new domicile, leaving and coming from the domicile airports, always returning home if you travel for business or any event, always coming back to your domicile, not your residence if you have them elsewhere.
so now family was another one. So let's
Yes,
say, snowbirds are typically have older children, and those older children may live in New York.
right.
So an older child just had a baby, two of them had a baby, and you moved to Florida this year, but you're coming back a lot because your kids just had a grandchild.
Right.
And is that one of those aspects where the auditor is going to make a business decision?
No,
No?
no, no. They're not cold-hearted, but they're just not going to really care about that.
Really?
Historically, the family factor went to see where the minor children attend school. They want to make
Okay.
sure that the minor children are attending school in the new domicile in the local schools.
Right.
That sometimes isn't always possible, especially with high net worth individuals who have children that go to private schools. There's waiting lists sometimes, and they'll have to continue finishing out a year or continuing on here until they can get into the special school. And I've had that situation, and they absolutely look at that. If there are no minor children, the state likes to look at obviously where the spouse is, and if there's separate lifestyles, explain why and show exactly how those separate lifestyles work. And then they go to see immediate family. Where are your parents? Where are your siblings? Where are grandchildren? Where are your adult children living? Because
Right.
they want to see those ties back to New York. Again, completely out of your control, but it helps them with the time factor. They're kind of interrelated with the home factors to where you're coming back to, if you do retain something here.
Well, I got to tell you, it's a topic that does require thought, preparation, and somebody to help guide you. You are like the Sherpa of tax controversy, which it's extremely important. As more and more you know, sadly, I'm going to be 65 this year, and hopefully someday I will retire. But you know, those thoughts are in everybody's mind. So if somebody wanted to consider that move and wanted consultation with an expert, how would they get in touch with you?
So they can reach me at my law firm, Shaves, Perlowitz, Luftig. My phone number is 212-223. I have to look at it, it's written down. 212-223-5704. Or
Okay.
you can email me at M as in Mary Friedrich, Friedrich, at cplawfirm.com. You can visit our website, cplawfirm.com, for more information. It shows every area that we cover in tax controversy, and it also has my contact information there as well. But absolutely
Fantastic.
what you said, Mike, planning is so key. I've spoken to many people in which we've spoken about all the rules, and they've actually decided, you know what, this is not a sacrifice we're willing to make now. We're going to hold off. And that's okay.
Right.
It's
Well,
probably the best decision to make, because getting an audit and with not so great facts is not going to go out. It's not going to end well.
it's going to bite you in the ass.
Yes,
Right.
absolutely.
Okay.
You mentioned interest and penalties. Those are always tacked on.
And I cannot even imagine what those might be. But yeah, you know what? My middle daughter just got married. She may have grandkids soon, hopefully. But yeah, you have to take everything into consideration. But
Absolutely.
hopefully people will see this and understand that it is not a journey to go alone. And
Right.
you're a fantastic guest, and
Thank
I
you.
hope to have you back here another time.
Oh, it was a pleasure. Thanks for the opportunity, Mike.
It's my pleasure. All right. Thank you, Marissa.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Do You Ever Wonder? And we hope that you enjoyed the show. Next week, we will have another terrific guest telling their story. And if there are any specific topics you'd like to hear more about, please don't hesitate to let us know. Our curiosity, like yours, knows no bounds. Please subscribe and like and share this episode on your social media. See you next week.